Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us from Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here in snowy Washington, D.C. We have this live streamed public dialogue coming to you on promoting a consistent ethic of life, investing in low income children and families on a day when we've seen some movement forward on these issues, and we're looking forward to talking about that. We're so grateful to have so many of you joining us here today with over 1,300 people registered in advance to listen to our conversation. So the consistent ethic of life is an active commitment to protect all human life and promote the dignity of all. It's being tested right now in new and challenging ways. The U.S. Supreme Court's Dobbs decision and its repercussions have generated intense conflict and underscored our responsibility to listen to and learn from the experiences of women, to protect unborn human life, and to offer concrete support to women and children and their families. Other compelling issues of life and death haunt our nation, including the continued imposition of the death penalty, racial, economic, and environmental injustice, and conflicts and horrific violence in countries around the world. People are too often treated as numbers and things, not as children of God, worthy of protection and care. For Catholics and others of goodwill, this is a test of our faith and humanity and an inescapable challenge. We're called to build an authentic culture of life, one that defends the inviolable dignity of all human beings, to pursue dialogue and resist ideological approaches, and to stand in solidarity with the vulnerable, consistently and effectively defending human life and dignity in these violent and divisive times. So today we'll focus on how the U.S. Catholic community and others can effectively advance the common good through a principled and active commitment to the consistent ethic of life, and how we can advance this commitment in our lives, our public policy efforts, our on-the-ground work, and our advocacy for the most vulnerable. And in particular, how to make support for low-income children and their families a moral and national priority. Just this morning, leaders in Congress announced that as part of a broader framework, they have come to an agreement to expand the child tax credit in a way that will make some 15 million children from low-income families better off, an important step forward, particularly in a time of such hostility and division in our country and on the Hill. We're looking forward to talking about that more today. We have such a remarkable group of people here to have this conversation with us. Patrick Brown is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, where his work with the Life and Family Initiative focuses on developing a robust pro-family economic agenda and supporting families as the cornerstone of a healthy and flourishing society. Unfortunately, Sister Krista Parrott has come down with a very bad case of laryngitis and is unable to join us today. And of course, she's in our prayers, and we will get her back with us for another conversation. But in her place, longtime friend of the initiative, Sister Norma Pimentel, is joining us at the last minute, and we're so grateful to have her with us, and her voice and her witness especially. Sister Norma is the longtime friend of the initiative, and she is the leader of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley and the Humanitarian Respite Center for Families Fleeing Violence in Central America. Pope Francis has praised her for her work with refugees and immigrants to the United States. Carrie Robinson, a Georgetown graduate, is the president and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, a network of Catholic charities agencies that provide help and create hope for more than 15 million people a year, regardless of their religious, social, or economic backgrounds. And Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner is the CEO of Skinner Leadership Institute, a co-convener of the National African American Clergy Network, a co-founder of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Prayer Breakfast, and a major leader in the Circle of Protection. So once again, thanks to all of you who are joining us on the live stream. Please share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag ConsistentEthicGU and by tagging the initiative at GUCST Public Life. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later on, so please submit your questions to the panelists by following the prompts at the bottom of your screen. This dialogue is also being recorded, and it'll be posted on our website later, so please look for that, as well as on our social channels. And so with that, let's start our conversation. I'd like to ask each of you in turn an opening question. And Carrie, I'd love to start with you. What does the consistent ethic of life mean for people of faith in 2024, especially as it's an election year?
It means that there is an urgency for our commitment to human dignity, to recognizing it, upholding it, defending it, and I would argue modeling it in our speech, work, actions, in the very way we comport ourselves. It also means that people of faith and people of goodwill are called to create and advance the conditions that contribute to the flourishing of humankind and of creation. It's not an accident that our call to care for one another and for our common home are inextricably linked in 2024. And what consistency means is that no one is excluded.
No one is excluded. I love that. Patrick, how about yourself? What do you think the consistent ethic of life means in 2024, especially as we look at this election year?
Well, Kim, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a great panel to be a part of, and especially for me, I started my career at Catholic Charities USA under Carrie's predecessor, and worked with Sister Norma and a lot of great folks across the Catholic Charities Network. It's such a great privilege to be talking about this super important question, and I think it's no secret that politics these days needs a little bit of the salt and light of the church's witness about the dignity of the human person on both sides. It's such a temptation for us to turn our political adversaries into caricatures and to attribute the worst of motives to whatever policies on the table. And I think the church's recognition of the inalienable human dignity of the human person from the moment of conception to the time where God calls them back home is something that's sorely needed in so many debates. And I think if we aren't providing that lens and that perspective, it's going to be really tough to find our way through so many of the divisions and debates that get so poisonous.
Thanks so much. That's what we try to do here at the initiative, and I know that you try to do as well, and bringing the Catholic voice to these conversations. Dr. Skinner, how about yourself? What do you see as the consistent ethic of life for people of faith in this election year?
Well, thank you for including me. I've had many years to work with John Carr, who considers himself a good Catholic. Consistent ethic of life is rooted in the word, for me, life. That comes from Genesis 1:27. That's consistently reminding us that all humans are created in the divinity and dignity of our Lord God, and that there is nothing that should not happen for all people the same. Everyone deserves a life that is valued, a life that matters. It means that our budget, our moral document must reflect that. It means the way we do business must reflect that. Sadly, in 2024, we're going to be compelled to get out of the politics of thinking about these issues and deal with the moral order, the teachings of Jesus. And we will do well as both Catholics and non-Catholics to begin to think that our language is more centered in our faith and our moral teaching than where we stand left or right or center. If we do that, then we can draw the nation to that conversation, to not think about life as left or right politics, but as rooted in the moral grounding of our very nation.
Thank you so much. And your work at the Circle of Protection has been such a witness to that. Sister Norma, how about yourself? What does the consistent ethic of life mean to you in the Rio Grande Valley in 2024?
Thank you, Kim. It's true that we must focus on the dignity of every person, excluding nobody, but it is not until we are present directly with somebody that is in circumstances that are faced with this imbalance of ethics between who has a right to receive attention and who doesn't, and we can very easily push aside certain people just because who they are. I find that is so important that our presence amongst those who are most vulnerable must be real and must be there so that we can respond correctly to all the amazing things that everybody has just mentioned. It is true, and the only way we can do that is if we allow ourselves to be present to them, because as we are faced today, there are very serious issues that we're not addressing correctly because we're pushing aside our faith and not prioritizing it to make us live out our principles that defend all life and exclude nobody.
Thank you so much. You always bring the faces and the stories of people who you serve to our conversations, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that as we move forward. Terry, let me turn back to you and have a little bit of a longer conversation now. You're the president, the relatively new president and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, and we're all just delighted that you're in this position. It's one of the most significant organizations working on behalf of poor and low-income children and families in the United States. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mission of Catholic Charities and how it reflects this commitment to the consistent ethic of life?
Well, one of the reasons I was drawn to Catholic Charities USA to begin with was its mission. And its mission is beautiful, simple, and compelling. The mission of Catholic Charities USA is to provide service to people in need, to advocate for justice in social structures, and to call the entire church and other people of goodwill to do the same. Catholic Charities is Catholic social teaching in action. And I know that this is a primary value of the Institute and your work with your colleagues there, Kim. On any given day or night, anywhere in the United States and the 5 US territories, there are Catholic Charities staff and volunteers responding to human suffering in their midst. And Catholic Charities provides not just humanitarian aid, but moral support, relief, mercy, all kinds of, it's kind of like a ministry of presence to the people who are suffering in our midst. Our clients face virtually every social struggle or challenge one can imagine. Hunger accounts for 49% of what we do. Hunger in the United States. There are challenges of addiction or poor mental health, a need for safe shelter, recovery from extreme weather events. Last year alone, there were 59 major climate-related disasters in the United States. So these are our neighbors, our family members, all throughout the US who are coming before Catholic Charities. The only common denominator is they are human and they are suffering and they are in need of mercy, and they know that they can find it at Catholic Charities.
Well, that's great. Can you say a little bit more about how Catholic Charities and how all of us can put this consistent ethic of life into action? And in particular, what kind of policies and investments are needed to protect the life and the dignity of the most vulnerable?
Well, one of the things that is so compelling about the structure of Catholic Charities is that because there are 168 local agencies throughout the country, that means they can respond to the local needs of a community in any given day. And I find it's not just what is done by the staff and volunteers, it is the manner in which it is done. There is a mercy that is part of the equation, a radical love that is rooted in the gospel. It is, as I said, Catholic social teaching in action. And the presenting need of a parent with small children might be one thing, but because of this ministry of presence, it leads invariably to a host of other resources. So the presenting challenge might be basic hunger, and that can lead to an invitation to help the parent complete his or her degree or get job training or material assistance with diapers, baby wipes, car seats. And one form of ministry, one response leads to another. So there's a really holistic approach to the care that is being offered that extends to all people, regardless of their background, their religion, their race, their circumstance. Again, as I say, there's a consistency about beholding the human dignity before those, especially those who are suffering.
I love that. I mean, in the same way that all of these challenges are interconnected and you have to have a holistic approach, I think it's clear from what you said that our teachings, Catholic social teaching, is all interconnected and hangs together in that way too. Patrick, let me turn to you if it's okay. You're a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. You write broadly about issues affecting families in the pro-life movement. Why is it important to engage on issues of economic assistance for families, especially poor women and children? And how should these commitments be reflected in the movement and in a consistent commitment to human life more broadly?
Yeah, so my organization, the Ethics and Public Policy Center, is a group that's been in DC for almost a half century now, really focused on applying the richness of our faith tradition to the questions of public policy in the contemporary arena. And I think a lot of times when people hear discussions around pro-family policy or things like that, they tend to think about a lot of the hot button issues that tend to attract a lot of headlines, and we can agree or disagree on how that cashes out in the political arena. But I think where we need to be marrying some of these conversations around values and what's being taught in schools and certainly protecting unborn human life, marrying those concerns with a recognition that not all threats to the family are cultural, right? That there are economic pressures weighing down on families, not just ones who are in deep poverty or those who are going to Catholic charities to receive services, but working class families as well, those who struggle to balance having multiple jobs or wish that a parent could take some time out of the labor force to stay home with young kids when they're growing up and just don't feel like they're able to make ends meet. Those families, especially, I think, sometimes get lost because there's not an advocacy group in DC in the same way that there is an advocacy group for energy regulation or the environment or some of these other big ticket items. And as we've seen, as we'll talk about, I think part of the reason why things like the child tax credit don't always get the attention in DC they deserve is just because is not a natural interest group for the parents of America and for people with young kids, because soon they're going to age out and become empty nesters. And that's sort of the circle of life. But if we're not advocating for them, especially at a time when they're most vulnerable, when you've just had a baby and you're trying to balance time off of work, and if you don't have paid leave, all these things that can make being a parent in America so difficult. Those are what I try to keep in mind. And I think that's where we've seen some appetite for those on the right, as well as our friends across the aisle on the left, to think about what are some of those economic pressures facing families, keeping people from having the number of kids they'd like to, making it more challenging to raise kids in the environment that you'd like to see them raised in. And that goes for families across the income spectrum.
Well, let me follow up a little bit on that, Patrick. You've been a part of pro-life and more conservative conversations around the child tax credit and other programs that provide financial support to low-income families. So can you describe the agreement that we heard about this morning on the child tax credit, and what's your reaction to it, and how can we help make sure that this turns into action, turns into policy?
Okay, yeah, I will do my best without putting everybody to sleep talking about tax policy. It's not everybody's cup of tea. But the basic gist of today's agreement, and I want to caveat this by saying we still don't know what Senate Republicans are going to do. We still don't know what House leadership is going to do. It's great that we've reached a bipartisan deal, and I'm enthused by that. I think we should be cheering for this and hoping that they can find some sort of way to get it across the finish line, but it's still very much an open question if they'll be able to do so. But if they do, the contours will be really focused on, I would say, the sort of lowest, maybe we'll say 10 to 40, if you think of the income spectrum, right? That's sort of not the poorest of the poor. We're still not talking about expanding the child tax credit to everybody like we did with the expanded CTC under the Biden administration's coronavirus package, but focusing on making it scale in faster. If you're a low-income family, particularly a single mom with kids, you're able to claim the CTC per child as opposed to per family. It's a technical difference, but it actually leads to, could be hundreds of dollars more over the course of the year. And I think that's probably the biggest change that low-income families would see, that's more money in their pocket to help deal with diapers and groceries and childcare and all the other things that pile up on parents. There's also some adjusting for inflation and some of these other sort of wonky things that I won't bore people with. But I think it's important to stress that this is a modest bipartisan agreement. It's not a giant revolution in social policy. It's recognizing that, especially for low-income, working-class families, families on a single income, those are the ones who we should be focusing on most when it comes to tax policy, because they're the ones who need the relief the most. We're not worried about people who are making six figures. They'll do okay, but the families who are coming to Catholic Charities for aid, or people who are just getting by, this agreement is really focused on that swath of the population, and I think it'll be exciting if it can go forward, and we'll be hoping it does.
Thanks so much for that. I appreciate your description of it. And Dr. Skinner, I want to come to you now. Patrick said that, all too often we don't have people in Washington who are advocating for the poorest of the poor. But when I think of the circle of protection, I have to say, I think of it as being the one group, one of several groups, but really just a leading group who work to protect the least of these in the federal budget and in national policies and priorities that promote the interest of the most vulnerable. You've dedicated your life to advocating for the poor and working class families. I want to get to your thoughts about the agreement that was announced today, but first, let's talk a little bit more generally. Why should people of faith work for a priority for the poor? Why should we draw a circle of protection around the lifelines for the poor and vulnerable in the federal budget?
Thank you for the question. If we are to believe the Pew Research, there, out of the 330 million Americans, over 200 million are said to be people who believe in God. Okay. They may not all be followers of Jesus. We haven't separated them by denomination, but just generally people who say, I believe in God. If that's true, we ought to be collectively repenting today about the way we think about and the way we deal with the poor. We can use words like dignity and the like, and we all know what the scripture says, but that is not the way we treat the poor in this country. And that is why in 2011, a number of very, very diverse Christian groups came together. I mean, from the right to the left, came together and developed what we call the circle of protection around the poor. There is no lobby as such for the poor. Out of the millions of people who are represented in Washington, you can go from hearing to hearing, member to member, House and Senate, and there are very few advocates directly. When the poor get something, you always see a tack on for the middle class. There's a spirit of despising the poor. And we really think that right now, I believe that Circle of Protection is probably one of the few groups. The Catholic Charities have done an amazing job, and others, but we have decided that coming together, we're stronger. So collectively, we represent 100 million people. We're Black, we're Asian, we're Latino, we're Catholic, we're Protestant, all coming together in that circle, meeting on a monthly basis about what tax policies and what federal budget should be resisted so the budget is not balanced on the backs of the poor. Why should we do that? Because to say that you believe in God means you believe in the word of God. And over 2,000 verses of scriptures tell us from Genesis to Revelation of God's preferential treatment for the poor. God loves everybody. He doesn't hate the rich, doesn't hate the middle class, but there's a preferential treatment because human greed will always settle on the backs of the poor. It means that people will do what is in their interest unless some people look out for the vulnerable. That's what we do. That's why we do that. And sadly, 40% of those 46 million or so who are poor are children. Now, we can use a bootstrap theory on an adult. It doesn't work for a baby. And so we feel that our work is the work of Jesus. It's what Jesus would be doing if Jesus were, in human skin today. Think about it. The cycle of poverty always comes back to bite us. How does that happen? If you don't care for a child who is born on the wrong side, what we call the wrong side of town, from the wrong zip code, as a baby, You're going to be dealing with a teenager in jail. You're going to be dealing with a child who drops out of school. You're going to deal with a sick parent, people who are sicker, who are more likely to be in communities surrounded by violence. We pay taxes. We pay more when we don't take care of God's business. That's why we do this.
Well, thank you so much for your work and for your witness and for that of the circle, everybody involved in it. One of your major efforts has been to expand and strengthen the child tax credit, which provides, as we've discussed, essential assistance to kids and their mothers and lifts families out of poverty. Can you tell us about your reaction to the agreement announced this morning, and how can we ensure that this kind of talk turns into action, turns into policy?
Right. I consider myself what I call a prisoner of hope. So I'm hopefully optimistic that this small group of bipartisan members who come together will be able to impact the whole. I mean, we're in probably one of the most divisive Congresses of my time here in Washington, over 30 years. And where there were times people on the left and the right might have disagreed, but they disagreed on issues. Now, they're not even agreeing on the same facts. They don't even see the same worldview. So I'm hopeful. Now, when I say hopeful, what I mean is that that's not enough. We have to reach out right now, all of us. If you have contacts with members of on the Republican side, you should be reaching out to those people, and likewise, those of us who are Democrats should be doing the same with Senator Wyden and others. I think I can't say enough about how often the Circle of Protection has written letters to the White House, written letters to House and Senate members. We have visited on a regular and consistent basis, even in this last Congress, that has made a difference. We can be in this group, even the people on the line today, this small number of people who just, if you would just act, one letter is 100 people. So imagine if over, 1,000 people on this call, each sent a letter, did a call, did a text, did a tweet, the amazing impact that could have.
And that does seem to be incumbent on us, right? To work to bring our allies, our friends along to see that this is just vital work for people of faith. I thank you again for your work on it. Sister Norma, let me turn to you and thank you once again for being here. When we think about the consistent ethic of life in the United States, one of the issues for Catholics that's so central is the issue of migration and how migrants are treated at the border. We've talked a lot about policy so far. I'd love to now turn to what you mentioned earlier, which is the human face of this challenge. How do you see your religious vocation, your everyday work, as a way to live out the consistent ethic of life day to day?
Upholding the sanctity of human life is part of who I am and what I do and every single day, because it is what we can do together collectively. You know, one of the things that I form part of and in initiating and becoming part of here in our community is bringing everybody together so that together we can respond to what we see before us every single day. And it's not just myself, it's not just Catholic Charities, it's not just Catholics, it's everybody. From the law enforcement, from Border Patrol, from city officials, county officials, every single person in our community, we model who we are as being one community that moves forward to respond to what we see, you know. And from working with like the chief of Border Patrol that immediately I can call her and says, we have this situation. And she immediately moves forward to make sure that she can do her part to address from her end what she can do about it. Or when I can call the mayor or the county judge or anybody, you know, that works here in our community, is that collective effort to be one that makes it possible that we can be present to those people who are most vulnerable, who are defenseless, who right now, for example, we're dealing with very cold weather. And for most of us, we have a nice jacket, we have a nice warm place that we are that we don't have to be worried about. But we're having to deal with people that are on the bridge freezing, or people that are living in little tents that becomes like little icicles, because the water that falls in it becomes ice, and they're freezing, and we're not talking about just one family, we're talking about thousands of them, and coming together in an effort to try to be present to them, to give them the best we can to make sure that they protect themselves from this severe weather that they're facing. And hopefully that they're able to be protected. And I can call the head of the port of entry and says, there's a family that this just happened just yesterday, where a mother was actually in her labor pains and on the bridge, and she needed to get to the other side so that we can help her correctly. And I could actually call the head of the board of the port of entry and says, help us move this lady to the proper place. And they did immediately. And so this collective way of work coming together is so important, to be present and to be able to respond to the realities that we're facing, and allowing our faith to be part of who we are, as Dr. Skinner just said so beautifully. That faith that we should not hide, but rather bring forward so that it can take the lead into how we act and how we are present to everybody. And especially in this year that we are facing an election, as you mentioned, and it's important that we be able to make sure we take note of the importance of how do we become present to those that need us most, because those are the ones that we must advocate for, we must be a voice for, and if we don't, we're losing that part of us that is why we were created, to live out our faith and the values of what God created us for, and so I think that the border right now is facing very difficult challenges. And so the more that we can join, not only locally here as we do here, but with people like yourselves that can form part of defending life, all life is very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, and for describing some of the challenges that people face at the border, Sister Norma. I think another challenge sometimes is misinformation about what Catholic Charities has done. I mean, your witness is just so powerful, and your concrete help for families in need, in order to do what hopefully anyone would do, seeing people right there struggling. Can you talk a little bit about some other challenges that these families face, and what we can do out here, those people watching, to help?
Yes. Well, one of the things that is sometimes so misunderstood for immigrant families, for children, is the misleading information about the fact that they are that what we do is not good, and in reality is protecting them from the evils of life and the abuses and extortions and very difficult encounters they have with those that take advantage of them. I think that their lives are in great danger, and sometimes instead of helping create pathways that bring families and children to safer spaces, we make it more difficult for them, and so I think that creating policies and initiatives that really lead people to be safe, to be protected, and so that they could be treated correctly is so important, because right now some procedures and actions that are taken put people in danger. Just trying to attempt to enter the United States, sometimes their life is tragic, as we all saw in Eagle Pass, what happened to the mother and the two children, that died. This is every day that happens, that people constantly exposing their lives because they are afraid what is behind them. And those that are after them to destroy their life and take advantage of them, and daring to cross a river, and then finding themselves that not able to have somebody rescue them because of the policies in place by a state that avoids somebody to reach out and help. I think that it should be a priority to all of us to defend life, to protect it, and that should have nothing to hold us back from helping those that really need our help, and we're not doing that sometimes.
Thanks so much, Sister Norma. Now we're going to open the conversation up a little bit. Dr. Skinner, what's your reaction to what you've heard so far, and in particular to what Sister Norma just said?
I think Sister Norma has just so beautifully made the faces of humans real to us. We can see and feel cold. We can feel someone who has no warm place to go. I think your question was really poignant, and I wonder if Sister Norma could drill down a little bit, because I thought you gave her an opportunity to say to those of us who look at these long lines of people under the bridge, and we may see mothers and babies and kid on somebody's back, and your heart goes out, but you don't know what to do. Maybe you and Ms. Robinson in Catholic Charities can tell us, what can an average person do? We don't have a beef with immigrants. We don't think they poison the blood of humanity. We don't think that. We think that everybody in the country is an immigrant, however they got here. Okay, so help us to know. I'm asking, the Black Church is asking, that I represent, how can we specifically help?
Thank you, Dr. Skinner. And it's a very good question. And I know so many people want to know, how can I help? And it starts, I think, by being that voice, by speaking up and helping our leaders here in our country create policies that defend and protect life, that make it easy for families, people who are asking for protection, for safety, to enter this country and be processed correctly without having to be exposed to so many dangers. We can make it right. And why can't we? Why do we allow it to just be politicized so that we push aside that human element that is so critical to who we are as a person? And so if we can, all of us, always help speak up for those to implement policies and initiatives that defend life and that provide those pathways, correct pathways that will respond to that. And of course, one of the efforts that we're working very hard to do recently because of this cold weather is making sure we got enough blankets, making sure we have enough spaces that are protected, and moving people from one location to another so they won't be by the river, and they won't be. So I would say connect with any effort, whoever's doing something, offer to help them. It doesn't have to be here in the Rio Grande Valley. It can be anywhere along the river if that's one of the ways. But there's also a lot of immigrants everywhere in the United States. And you can also find ways of helping them. I say if every family in the United States would open their hearts and their doors to reach out to at least one family that is in your community that needs just guidance, needs help, I think that would be an amazing effort. There wouldn't be a problem with immigration or with immigrants or in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Norma. Thank you so much, Dr. Skinner. Carrie, I want to go back to you now. Dr. Skinner talked about the importance of writing these letters to our representatives in Congress. Last week, you were part of a major letter from Catholic Charities USA and the U.S. Catholic bishops urging members of Congress to adopt a strengthened child tax credit in any upcoming tax package and make sure that it's available to the poorest families in the United States. As we've talked about, we had some movement on that today. What's your reaction to that? And why is this such an essential part of what it means to have a life-affirming society?
Well, first, my co-panelists have led the way on this, and I am so grateful for their advocacy and their work, really dedicating their lives to this and to humane policies like this. So hats off to my co-panelists and for you to convene us. Our social policy team at Catholic Charities USA is literally reviewing the text of the agreement as we speak. And based on early summaries, while not as robust as we'd like, the expansion to the child tax credit seems to be something we would definitely support. Our recommendation, however, remains that the child tax credit should prioritize the poorest, most vulnerable children in our country, in keeping with Catholic social teaching's call for a preferential option for the poor. The poverty data shows that 5 million children entered poverty in 2022. That is an abomination. How can that be? 5 million children entered poverty. It's a staggering number. I think it calls for pressing moral solutions. And while it's obviously too simplistic to say that only one factor caused this steep rise in child poverty, clearly the expiration of the expanded child tax credit played a significant role. So we are encouraged and we're grateful for this bipartisan proposal to expand it. And I think you'll hear more from us on the specifics once our team has completed their review.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Patrick, I'm going to come over to you now to get your reaction to what you've heard. And also to ask, I think we've heard Dr. Skinner mention it, others, the importance of challenging our own allies, right? People to come along on these kinds of issues that really help low-income families. How do we do that? How do you do that in your work? And most of all, how do we use those kinds of challenges to help preserve what seems to be, from what I've heard today, a somewhat fragile bipartisan consensus? How do we work today to help move that forward and get it across the finish line?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the most fundamental questions about politics that we all have to try to answer, right? I mean, there's no one side that has a monopoly on the right way to address these deep-seated social problems. Each side comes with their own biases and their own perspectives and their own status quo, preference for things that has worked in the past. So it's always going to be a challenge to try to figure out the best of both teams, as it were, on the left and the right, and figure out where there's common ground. And I think the story of the child tax credit itself actually is a great example of what happens when it was launched in the mid-90s. A Republican Congress worked with President Clinton to pass the first child tax credit. It's been expanded under both Republican and Democratic presidents over the past couple of decades. I think the way that we talk about it is different across the aisle. Republicans and conservatives love to talk about the fact that it supports families and supports parents and recognizes that parents bear the cost of having a child in a way that non-parents don't, right? This is sort of a recognition of the hard work of parenting and the fact that society benefits from people having kids. And as we've heard today, I think it's no secret to say that people on the left tend to focus much more on the anti-poverty effects of the child tax credit and thinking about how providing parents with more cash gives them more options to help build bridges out of poverty and break the cycle of poverty and those type of things. Those are different rationales, but ultimately they can end up in the same place. So recognizing that sometimes we'll speak different languages, and sometimes that means we have different priorities, but that shouldn't stop us from figuring out incremental ways to move the ball forward. What I do think can get counterproductive, and this happens on both sides, I will be the first to admit it, is when we get into a purity spiral and we start to say, well, this is not the ideal, this is you're working with the other folks and don't you know how terrible they are. They have different tendencies on different sides, but I think politics is always going to be the art of the possible. I think everyone's always going to feel a little bit dissatisfied. But as Carrie said, we can always continue to keep pushing the ball forward and trying to reach for something that we think is, I would love to see something more along the lines of something that Senator Romney proposed a couple of years ago, rethinking our approach to the child tax credit and turning it into a monthly payment. That's not politically possible anytime soon. But if we can move the ball forward and say, hey, look, we'll give a little here, we'll get a little there, are there ways that we can provide rhetorical cover for some of these bipartisan initiatives? I think that's a really important part of the game, and recognizing that sometimes that's going to mean holding your nose and working with people who you may disagree with on a lot of things, and that's politics.
That's politics, right? Is coming to some kind of solution that we can agree with to advance policies that we know will help those in need. Thanks for that, Patrick. We're going to go to audience questions. I have one more for Dr. Skinner, and then we're going to go to your questions. We have some great questions from Georgetown students, and others, and I encourage you to write in at the prompt you've seen at the bottom of your screen. But first, Dr. Skinner, I want to come to you with one more from me. We've talked about the fact that this is an election year. How can people of faith and goodwill ensure that the consistent ethic of life that we've been talking about helps drive campaign decisions, becomes an important part of the conversation in this really vital time?
Thank you for the question. I think it's an issue of messaging. When people hear life, they think we're talking about abortion only, not about justice in the courts, death penalty, anti-racism efforts. We're not wealth inequality. So when you just stop there with the phrase consistent ethical, you're going to get a certain group of people who are already committed to making sure that that abortions don't happen, that we protect, life in the womb. You already have lost a whole bunch of people who are concerned about a whole life ethic. I'm not saying you have to change your language, but when Black people hear, I mean, we're probably the group that has been the most against abortion for a long time. Particularly Black people of faith, because we know that our lives have not been valued in the penal system, in economics, in health, in education. So we think about it in a holistic way. So if you're going to message to people, and I think I just heard Patrick say that, you've got to think about how people hear. Communication is not what has been said, it's what's being heard. So we have to think about how do we message this in a way that taxpayers think about. You're going to have to pay less if you take care of children early. If you take care of all people, they may not even have compassion. It doesn't matter. They want to make sure they take care. Someone else on the left might think about it in terms of poverty and anti-poverty. Someone else may think about it differently. I think we have to find a language that most people care about the whole person. They want they think about, what I want, what would be satisfying to me as a person. We have to find a way to say we all matter. All of our lives have value. We need to be taken care of. If we can't take care of ourselves, we don't have a problem with $1.7 trillion. Was it 6 years ago or 7 years ago now for the wealthy? We have to acknowledge that we think about the poor in terms of deserving or undeserving. Okay. So that consistent ethic of life has to be put in the terms of our Lord calls us to. I still go back to our faith. We have to think about ourselves as people of faith, not just people of politics. So I may disagree with a right-wing person of faith, but we can come together on the teachings of Jesus. We can find a common ground there. I believe that we have been so divided because we've let this become a politicized issue. I want to think about it in 2024 in terms of humanity, in terms of compassion, in terms of the moral order. I want to think about it as Sister said to us earlier about the what did she call it? The power of presence in people's lives. I just think our language has to be thought through differently. But if you just throw words like life out there, I think about pro-fetus, pro-birth, but I'm not thinking about the whole life of a child. Our language needs to be clarified.
I take that very much to heart, and maybe go back to you, Sister Norma, a little bit on that. I think that one of the questions that we have coming in is what keeps people from recognizing immigration as a life issue, right? As not seeing that as part of sort of the constellation of issues that we think about when we think about caring for the human dignity of each and every person. Why is there such a resistance to seeing migration and migrants in that way?
I think that we must redefine what defending life means, because defending life is all life matters. Everyone matters. And the sanctity of our life is everyone in every aspect of life, in every part of life. And so we must open our mind to allow God. I always tell this to people when I'm speaking, especially to young priests or seminarians. And I said, how do I know? They ask me, how do I know what I need to do? And I always take them back to that one thing is be present. And God will guide you to know what to do, but we have to allow God to guide us. But because if we think we already got it, then we're out. We have to let God guide us to be what he is wanting us to see and do, and I think that's where we fail a lot of times. We interfere in God's defining us to move forward every day, to live out his presence of God in every action, in every way that we are, and we'll know what to do if we let him do it, but we don't.
Sure, that's wonderful. Thanks for bringing that to the conversation, Sister Norma. Carrie, I wonder if I might go to you on this same idea, right? Sometimes it seems hard for people to see the moral imperative, and this is related to a question we have from a viewer about the moral imperative and national priority of helping people in need, of helping those who are poor. Why is it sometimes hard for people to see this as a moral issue, as something that we should be sure to emphasize and consider when we're thinking about how to approach policy? And how do you at Catholic Charities work to advocate for those who are poor, who are in need?
Well, it's as Sister Norma and Dr. William Skinner have said so beautifully, what we're talking about in this whole hour is the innate dignity of the human being. And there is something particular about a person at their most vulnerable, experiencing the worst moments of their lives in great suffering, who comes before us. It is far too easy for us in the face of these overwhelming challenges to regard all of that as statistics rather than, as Sister Norma and Patrick and Dr. William Skinner are advocating, to see people as humans, members of this human family, just like you and me, who are in need. And the only way we're going to get there is to allow ourselves, as Pope Francis enjoins us to do, to encounter and accompany others, people who are different than us. And when we have a disposition of being present to people at their most vulnerable, then we hear their stories. We attend to what is causing them suffering. And it requires of us, as people of faith and goodwill, a response. Suddenly, this is someone I know. Now, taking it to the national level and advocating, using our voices, using our platforms, using our leadership, and using our networks to corral people to enact just humane policies is absolutely critical, so that we can create those very conditions that allow humankind to flourish. If one is suffering, we are all suffering. And I think we really have to see ourselves as interconnected, as part of this human family.
Thanks so much, Carrie. We have another question from the audience. Patrick, for you, a close reader of your work has written in to say that in December you wrote that among all the demographic and political shifts that we see, you've written that one of the only ways we can know what families want is to look at what public opinion says. But you also wrote that popularity is not the ultimate barometer of whether a given policy is worth pursuing or not. So within a Christian context, what do you think to be some of the barometers that we might look at as to whether a policy is worth pursuing or not?
Yeah, well, that's flattering and a little frightening that somebody's been reading when I wrote that closely. I don't know if I write it that closely. No, I think it is a trade-off. And again, I don't mean to sound like a political hack here, but part of the work of constructing public policy is knowing, having a finger on the pulse of where the electorate is. I think one thing that surprised me the most, I was shocked by this, honestly. We did a number of focus groups while the initial child tax credit expansion was being rolled out under the American Rescue Plan of the Biden administrations. And I naively maybe assumed that giving money to people would be pretty popular. And when we talked to working class Americans, mostly blue collar folks without a college degree, people who were not in poverty, but they're also not, making bank. They're kind of in that $40,000 a year sweet spot that we were talking about earlier. A lot of them were not impressed by that. And when we asked why, and again, these are focus groups, so you can take them with a grain of salt. A lot of them said it doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel fair that I'm out there, busted my butt, working 9 to 5, in my company. And those people out there aren't working at all and they're getting the same thing as I am. And I think that was really interesting to me. Now we can say, well, that's not really fair. Raising kids is hard work. We can try to nuance these findings. And again, maybe it's not representative of everybody. But I think the fact that the child tax credit expansion wasn't as politically popular as the Biden administration maybe thought it was going to be, and the fact that there wasn't as much of an outcry when it went away as I assumed there would be, suggests that knowing how people think about it and knowing that the discussions about what families need in El Paso or the Rio Grande Valley or Cincinnati or where I am here in Columbia, South Carolina, are often very different than the discussions that take place within the halls of Congress when we're talking about things like paid leave or universal child care or some of these other big ticket items that sometimes get brought up. And so recognizing that there is often a plurality and a diversity of opinions about what parents need, what families are looking for, can help inform the way that we approach these questions.
Thanks so much for that, Patrick. And thanks all of you. I want to come to everybody with one final question to kind of wrap up what we've talked about. What's one thing, and I think I'll start with you, Dr. Skinner. What's one thing each of us can do to change people's hearts on these issues, to help promote a consistent ethic of life, if that's the way you're talking about it, families in need, those living in poverty, migrants, those most vulnerable among us? What's one thing each of us can do, take away from this conversation to help in our lives, in our communities, in our nation? Dr. Skinner.
Thank you. I think Patrick said it well. We have to understand that people come from different social locations, and therefore they view the issues differently. Doesn't mean they're right and we're wrong. They just have a different frame of reference. But Carrie also said you have to, and she said it, that you have to almost like prevail upon people. You have to press them to see a different viewpoint. You have to earn a right to do that. You can't make people think your way. You need to build some bridges. You have to build bridges with people who don't look like you, don't vote like you, don't think like you, so that you can hear differently. One of the beauties of we had a Martin Luther King voter registration launch last night with 400 people registered. We had imams and rabbis and Christians and others on, and young leaders and others on, all talking about the question of why vote, because people have different views on that. We heard different views. And it's interesting in the gospel where it talks about in Acts that everybody from these different places heard the gospel in their own language. Give people the respect that they're hearing in their own language. You have to find a language that connects to their language. Okay, without demonizing people because they don't believe like you believe.
Thank you so much for that. Patrick, how about you? What do you think about one thing we can take away here?
Yeah, I second everything Dr. William Skinner just said. I would just say I think conversion also starts at home. And I think as we're in these dark days of winter and getting ready for Lent, it's a perfect time to be thinking about resurrecting the old traditions of fasting, and maybe giving up some meals during Fridays and Lent and donating the money you would have spent to your local Catholic Charities organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patrick. How about you, Sister Norma? What do you think is one thing we can take away, particularly as Lent approaches for us Catholics?
I think that, I have seen the transformation, people who come to the border, who come and see, change them totally. I've had somebody tell me that they're 100% against what I do. And yet when I show them and introduce them to the families and they see their faces, they are able to encounter that presence, that person very closely. It changes them, and they will 100% be supportive of what I'm doing. I think that personal encounter that Pope Francis talks about is so important. It makes so much sense that unless we allow ourselves to get close to see, we're guarding ourselves with all these ideas in our head and things that people put in us that keeps us away from really truly responding the way maybe God is helping me to understand and see things differently, So giving each other a chance to go see that homeless or that mother or that child in your own community, or come to the border, wherever you think God is asking you to go. But come close to somebody that you need to see so that you can then know what you need to do.
Thank you, Sister Norma. Carrie, how about you? What's one thing that we can all do to help advance a consistent ethic of life in our lives, in our communities, in our nation?
I think we can cultivate and commit to the virtue of generosity. We can all be generous in many, many ways. Generosity is humankind's birthright. We can be generous with our time, volunteer. We can be generous by extending the benefit of the doubt to those we assume are diametrically opposite us. We can be generous with our material resources, and we can be generous with our hearts, entering into the lives of other people. And it is a unique privilege to be present to someone in their suffering and in their vulnerability. And I think that this is the antidote to the epidemic of isolation and loneliness that plagues our country today.
What a wonderful way to end our conversation, fostering generosity, trying to make sure that we all approach these conversations with a generous spirit. I want to thank you, Carrie, Patrick, Dr. Skinner, Sister Norma, especially for joining us at the last minute. Thank all of you for joining us for this conversation. Just a reminder that this discussion will be recorded and it's posted on our website and social channels. We'll also have follow-up resources posted at our site as well. They're already there. We hope you can join us for our other dialogues this spring, and just a few that are upcoming. On January 29th, we'll have our first Latino leader gathering of the semester on breaking barriers, Latinos in higher education, economic mobility, and the Catholic Church. Participants include Shayla Cruz Morales, who is a Georgetown alumna and founder with her sister of College Access for Non-Citizens, Vicente Del Real, who is founder of the Chicago-based Latino ministry organization Escali, and Dr. Carlotta Ocampo, who is the provost of Trinity Washington University. In February, we'll be holding a public dialogue on faith in the faithful in the 2024 election with Bob Costa from CBS News, Ryan Burge, a scholar of religion and politics, and Catholic commentator Michael Sean Winters, and others. And we'll also in February be hosting a special Salt and Light gathering in collaboration with the Jesuitical podcast from America Media. We'll have other dialogues coming up in March and in April, and please visit our website for more details about these gatherings. Thanks so much to my colleagues, John Carr, Kim Mazik, Anna Gordon, and Christian Sunan for all their help in pulling this dialogue together. And finally, please join me in thanking Patrick Brown, Sister Norma Pimentel, Carrie Robinson, and Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner for being a part of this public dialogue on promoting a consistent ethic of life, investing in low-income children and families. Thanks again for being with us.